they're all pretty much A4. Some are a bit smaller, but most are that. And a couple of you in the audience might actually own ones, so you'll know that they're quite highly layered. There's lots of scribbles and changes and densities. But on the right, you see me 30 years ago, when maybe a little bit over, about 30 years ago, and I'm presenting an item about the Venice Biennale for The Late Show. When I used to work for BBC. It's Jeff Koons and his Cicciolina installation, and I'm saying rather wooden things to the camera for a 13-minute item on The Late Show. And then on the left, that is me as I've been for the last few months doing these drawings. They're pretty much mostly what I do now. I still do a bit of writing, and I also have a joint painting practice with Emma Biggs, who's sitting not far from me at the moment. It's about 18 inches to my left. And I'm what would I say I am? I'm doing what the materials will do on the left there. So there's a brass pencil sharpener. Oh, I can look at this, can't I? There's a brass pencil sharpener. There's Faber-Castell pencils, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I also use, and you can see their effect in both these drawings, a children's crayon called Stabilo, which is a woody Stabilo. Some of you may know it's a very opaque, greasy effect. They're very simple colours. They only have about 14 colours, and they're very vivid. And I use them in all sorts of ways, but they are what make the drawings sometimes look a bit painterly. And there's a metal ruler coming down from the left there. And yeah, pencils, pencil sharpeners. All the drawings come really from a sort of image bank in my head. I'm 66 now. I was 66 yesterday, actually. It was my birthday. I'm 66, and I've been involved with making art and commenting on art and explaining art since I was, since I went to art school, really, which was in the mid-70s. So, for over 40 years. And in that time I built up a lot of information, which often in my life I thought was useless information, really, because no one else seemed very interested in it. And also, I could never really see what it amounted to, what the connections were. I knew there were connections for me, but I weren't sure if they were important ones or unimportant ones. And in fact, some of the books that I've written, which were quite amusing books in the 90s, were criticised for the author often failing to remember what is important. And I confess that is a problem I have. And you'll see with these drawings, they're really associational. They just sort of follow up thoughts that seem urgent to me in the moment, but I don't really know if they are in the end. This is, I don't know if any of you recognise her. She's Eva Hess. That's a very fine sculptor from the 60s. And she's looking at a Jasper Johns catalogue. There's a photo of Jasper Johns on the back of it. She's having a look through it, and there's a work with a circular format by her on the wall. Some of these drawings I'm going to go through at a rate of, a fragment of a second, and some I'm going to just dwell on a bit. So, something I want to say is that the drawings for me are two things. One is the idea, which I have, and I note down much more quickly than I've pretty much said this half a sentence, really. Whereas making the drawings a couple of hours. So when I look at those drawings, I see there's the idea and then there's the making of it. And the making always comes back to the initial. The first thing is a notational thing. I think something and I scribble it down. And that's a pretty clear sign. There was Eva Hess's face, more or less recognisable to me. Then I keep going and I keep going. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing when I keep going. I'm sort of making balances of intensities here and there. Sometimes I'm making it look more like her, but often I depart from what she looks like. I sacrifice that in order to get these balances. So I end up with something that's a little bit honouring the appearance of Eva Hess and honouring the audience's desire to see a recognisable person, and then a little bit departing from that, and just sort of making a picture balance out. So the sort of scratchy surface of the things she's wearing, and the colours in the picture, and the arrangement of her, where she is on the paper, they're all completely arbitrary in relation to Eva Hess, but they're absolutely essential and precise, I would say, in relation to the needs of that picture as that picture developed. And always the end has got to go back to the beginning. So the beginning is Eva Hess. Then I'm just in some kind of universe, so I don't know what it is. But there must be at the end the simplicity of that first thing. The thought Eva Hess and cartoon picture Eva Hess. The pictures are often very newsy. I don't know if you know whose mother that is. Who famously had a bohemian mother who's a painter?
Boris Johnson.
Exactly. She died today. Yeah, well, I did this about a year ago. There's little Boris. I think he was probably born horrible, but he's probably learned many ways, many more dimensions of disgustingness over the years. But he's loved by his mum. She's a nice old bohemian artist with the gaps in her teeth. Another bit of news, I was at the Royal Academy Varnishing Day yesterday, and it was, this year it was all curated by Yinka Shonabar, and there was a very strong and vivid and effective representation of black and Asian art. And I often draw Philip Guston. Many of you will know that Philip Guston's sort of alter ego in those marvellous 10 years he had of painting a sort of funky, R-Crumb influenced figurative style involved Klansmen. And it's always ambiguous. You know, that proved to be a fatal ambiguity recently when his world touring show was cancelled, because it was the museums, including bloody Tate Modern, were worried that it would offend people, that there were Klansmen in the picture. But he thought the Klansmen, he sometimes said, well, what would it be like to be evil? You know, he's just contemplating life and reality and the psyche and what am I, what is the world, what is society. So there's a sort of always this Klan figure in Guston. So I had Guston going around Varnishing Day with me yesterday, and there's his alter ego, but the show is so like fantastically multicultural that the good Guston is there drinking the wine, and bad Klansman is banished through the exit. That's Guston drawing Daumier, the fantastic political sort of cartoonist draftsman of the 19th century. And that's Alice Neal painting Andy Warhol. You see Alice's paints and pots of brushes. That theme, that visual theme, recurs a lot in the drawings, like studio bric-a-brac. Is very meaningful to me. When I was in my 20s, I had left art school, nothing had happened, because I thought, you left and how could they miss this? You know, here I am. And then years and years went by, and those tubes, and it was just like, it was a horrible, rotten mistake, you know, the filth of them, you know, and nobody else had them. And it started to be the 80s, and everyone was clean and wealthy, and I lived in this filthy squalor with my girlfriend, who wasn't Emma, but who absolutely was, how did she get stuck with this guy, these tubes of paint? So they're like sort of triumphant badges of honour for me, and I love nothing but I've never lost the love of artist studios and my own studio and our studio that we share, and so that's a sort of theme that comes up a lot for me. She was painting Warhol, if you recall. He's a fantastic painter where he's very honest about his scars. He's got his corset there, and he's got massively scarred body. It was from one bullet, actually, from where Valerie Solana shot him, but it traversed around his internal organs so awfully. He ended up with this very racked, scarred body. As Andy, he's a very serious inventor. He's also a strange personality, an object of fascination. Nobody isn't really fascinated in a way by his weird superficiality. And he becomes a sort of thing upon which you can project anything, really. But he obviously is a figure who is always the modern, even though, of course, he's now rather retro to us, and so many things have happened since he was a shocking figure, and yet that strangeness of him can always be revived the minute you start to look into his life. That's Andy getting a blowjob from his lover and friend John Giorno in the early 60s. He's a very hard-working guy. He's painting his beans, his can of soup, and as we all must have love, his work and love make up his life. That's God blessing the union of George Dyer and Francis Bacon. He's saying, God bless you, Francis and George. And these are famous artists who are currently popular, having a sex orgy. Because probably neoliberals think that's what goes on. You know, that's why they buy the art. And there's left to right at the top is Joan Mitchell, Hilma af Klint, Francis Bacon, and then in the bed is Mark Rothko. You can see his head down there. And in the bed with him is Grace Hartigan, and on the floor is Helen Frankenthaler and Philip Guston. And this is a very different bed in a very different mood. This is Alice Neal in the psychiatric ward. She had a very severe crack up, and I think her life was sort of marked a lot by certain amounts of psychosis, psychotic episodes, certain amounts of chaos, and a determination all the time, a bit like what those tubes of paint mean to me, a determination to keep it up. And I think she certainly did paint and keep it up over decades in the face of incredible hardship and struggles, and with a very honourable social idea of justice and how people could be better, how life could be better, and then this rather sort of humanistic painting style and painting approach. But her worst crack up lasted for a year when she was about 30, and her husband Carlos Enriquez, who was a very good artist from Havana, left her and took their daughter, who she never saw again. And in fact, some of you know the biography of a complicated relationship with her daughter. But so she's morose, cracked up in the psychiatric ward, and Carlos and Isabetta are under the bed in her sadness. There's another strange moment in art. So everyone knows this is a strange moment. We don't really know what to make of it. And some of you will see that there's his bedroom. There's such a lovely painting. There's actually several versions of it. Many people don't realise that almost everything he did in several versions. But it's a painting which has a very iconic place in almost anyone's mind who's had anything to do with art. And what can't be said for many artists, with the exception perhaps of Andy Warhol, is it also probably has a powerful place in the minds of many people who are not particularly interested in art. It's a very reassuring, lovely painting. And in any case, I've put in this incident. I've mashed the two together. And then on the left there's that extra bit of darkness where we just don't know what that is. What did he have? You know, that green represents mystery. He had some form of epilepsy, we think, but no one really knows what it was. You know, obviously he had psychotic episodes. And I'm interested in that because my mother had them, and that was the background to all my life. It was her breakdowns from when I was naught to when she died, only not very long ago. And artists do get that. My mother was an artist, and mental illness and creativity do sometimes go together. So that's a theme that runs through the pictures. I guess, you know, this beautiful artist who died in the concentration camps, Charlotte Salomon, and that's a painting that she really did paint of Nazi officers mocking and abusing a group of Jewish women in Amsterdam, I think. And the women are saying, "Where are our men?" Because they didn't really know, and they're being mocked. And I've made up Charlotte in her room painting the picture. There's a fantastic Mexican muralist called Rufino Tamayo, and in the 1920s, he's a very beautiful, handsome man. This is the 1920s, his studio, and there's certain motifs of his paintings that I've picked out and abstracted from his paintings. They recur throughout all his paintings, and they include pointing fingers, light bulbs, packets of cigarettes, people smoking, painting materials like a palette with little bits of paint on it, and an easel. And the reason I point them out is because of that gentleman on the left, who in the 20s visited him when he was touring Mexico, and that's the young Philip Guston, who in his early 20s went with his friend, whose name I'm now blocking because I'm so old, having a senior moment, I can't remember his friend's name. They toured Mexico for several months, they painted murals themselves. And those themes, as you know, all recur in Guston's figurative paintings. So I'm saying, my speculation is that I think Guston did pick up something raffinato, and it settled in some semi-conscious way and came out again when he was ready to do that sort of figuration that he came up with at the end. You all know who that is?
Frida Kahlo.
Yes, and there's some self-portraits by her on the wall, and her palettes hanging on the wall, and there's her husband, and I can look at here, can't I? So she's reading Lenin, What Is to Be Done. I went to, after she died, after Georgia O'Keeffe died, I did some filming in New Mexico, as opposed to Mexico, and interviewed the very young man, as he had been, who assisted her for the last many years of her life, and about which it was a great scandal that there must be some kind of love between them. And there was indeed an intense love, but he assured me that it wasn't sex, so it'd be hard to imagine it was. She was about 100 when she died, and he was in his 20s. But, and everyone thought the worst of him, or the best they could think was, well, good luck to him, you know. But he really did assist her, and he did love her, and he helped her with everything, with all her work. She really trusted him, and she left almost everything to him. But the fact is, I didn't know when I did that filming that he gave almost everything back to the O'Keeffe Foundation. And his surname, I'm afraid I'm forgetting, but his first name was One. And at the time I used to call him One for the Money. I assumed, who would have, you know, that's what he was, a gigolo. But actually he was a lovely man, and that's her painting in the desert, and he's passing her the paintbrush. Walter...
Hamilton.
What?
Hamilton.
Thank you, Simon. One Hamilton. Walter Benjamin and Paul Klee are looking at an angel. Philip Guston. All of these pictures, all of these figures that I draw, almost all of them, I explore a sort of mythology that they have, and that's a mythology that I assume other people have in their heads, loosely a bit the same as mine. But I mix in new things, which I know other people don't associate with those artists. So in a minute we're going to see quite a lot of pictures featuring Guston. We'll see Guston's well-known concerns in his last 10 years. But we also see him doing other things that I make him do. And here I'm making him paint hell. There's him and the clan, and they're painting hell, which you'll recognise from the Bosch painting, the hell section, Garden of Delights. And I painted this earlier this summer, when Israel was bombing the West Bank. So that's the hell of Israel, and they're bombing. And I'm saying that Guston, just as he contemplated really dark wickedness with the clan, contemplated racism, and contemplated the worst that we can do, here he extends, sometimes in my drawings, extends that idea to other things that go on in our world. Sometimes he contemplates fun things, you know, like the Rolling Stones, because we think about anything. But this is a complicated one. You all know that work by Duchamp, Le Temps Donné. We have to look through a hole in a door, and then you see this strange female figure with her limbs splayed, and it's rather sexual, and then there's a landscape in the background, and there's a lamp. There's the lamp. He's putting it together, and he's about to fix the arm on. That arm was a cast of a lover of his from 10 years before, the wife, Maria Martin, I think, the wife of the Brazilian ambassador in New York. It's got the door in his studio. He's got bits of the installation there. He's got FX glue or whatever, and pots of brushes, and he's putting it all together. And there's his wife, Teeny Duchamp, in the doorway. Bruce Nauman, he lived in New Mexico for a long time, and he took on sort of cowboy ways. It's one of his videos from the 60s. Modigliani is painting a modernist nude. There's the model on the left, there's the painting in the middle, and there's one of his sculptures, bottom left. That's Freud paints the Queen, and there's a little Queen in that tiny picture on the easel in the middle there. Gorky and de Kooning shared a studio in the 30s in 8th Street. And de Kooning, when he was asked what were your main influences, he always said 8th Street. And that was the few years that he spent with Gorky. And such were the circumstances. It was because de Kooning was ready to receive something like that. And there was just a few years where his main visual principles were confirmed, in a way mirrored to him, and he loved Gorky and he loved his paintings. And this is, I mean, I didn't really know when I started out how that picture would be. I had no idea that they would be standing there. All I knew was that a painting by Gorky would be on the left. So I drew the picture. And then I drew the two guys, and they were in different positions. Woody Stabilo pencils are very good for their opacity, so you really can radically change a picture. So the only thing that really stayed in place was the painting. But the painting had took many forms of more complexity and more simplicity. And then that sort of rather flower-like light bulb, the light bulb with the yellow around it, made the picture in the end, because it allowed me to have those three yellowish bits, the painting, the light bulb, and de Kooning's form, which I say yellow, but for me I guess it's the tonality. There's three chunks there that allow all the balances to work, or that are an essential part of the balance, of those lumps of red and scratchy white and those black lines. Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg, there's a Jasper Johns painting, there's Rauschenberg's goat at the bottom left, were rather distanced from Warhol to begin with. They didn't like his particular homosexuality, his particular brand of behaviour. And then they warmed up to him, but they thought he was they were cool and semi-intellectual, and they knew John Cage. And he seemed dumb, and he was sort of letting down the mystique, really. But I think we see that in art, that it goes through these stages where everyone thinks one thing. And if you bring in a new thing, it could be good or it could be bad, and you wait a while until you accept it and pretend that you think it too. And I suppose I'm capturing that where a trend is about to change. Now, that's a picture of Hilma af Klint looking at a book of, she's studying anthroposophy, which is Rudolf Steiner's version of the other thing, which you're all going to tell me the name of. What's that? What? Exactly. Rudolf Steiner sort of formed his own branch of it, and she liked the whole thing. She was totally into it, and that was very important with her for her seances, which produced, as you know, her marvellous paintings, which we think of. We know it isn't true, because we know that spirits don't exist, but we think that, well, her paintings were told to her by spirits, as opposed to spiritual art by Kandinsky, where he's being spiritual. And until recently, we just thought, yeah, they're spiritual, Paul Klee. And then recently, we had to get our heads around the idea that actual spirits told Hilma to do the painting. And when someone told me, I saw this show at the Camden Arts Centre, I forget her name, this Swedish woman, and spirits told you to do the painting. I thought, what a fool, we've got to stop pretending we're like that now. And, of course, they'll just be diagrams, like Victorian diagrams. We know all about them. That's not art, you fool. And I did think that, and then I still in a way think that, but I also think they're fantastic paintings. And what an amazing sort of thing that she did with her life. The whole life was a sort of performance. The whole narrative of the spirits and everything. We find ourselves in a way underselling the achievement. I think it comes from theosophy and it comes from anthroposophy and study and that, but it's actually this incredibly magical thing. Of course spirits didn't do it, because there are no spirits. Spirits are a projection. There are spirits in that we are capable of mighty projections, but they're not spirits like Casper the Ghost. But as a matter of fact, I do draw spirits like Casper the Ghost, and we'll see them in a minute. But for the moment, I just want to say that really the subject of these drawings is us humans and how we behave. And for me, for Raphael, it's religion, Christian religion, but for me, it's the history of art. So I've got a whole load of mythologies. I don't know what to do with them. They're rubbish, really. Most people, when they build up this mythology, they write these popular introductions to art, which is so awful. But because amateurs want to know about art, they buy them and think that they're good. And I don't really want to do that. It's a horrible thing to do. It sort of kills inspiration, really. So I'm doing these drawings instead, which the only failing that they have is that they are a bit indulgent, and they're only about my fantasies. And I'm not really helping anybody with them, because most of the things I draw didn't really happen. Whereas the main thing a book introducing people to art must do is it must be true. That must be a realism, and there's an artist and he was born at a certain time. So in my drawings, things are true, but they're also extended and made how I want them to be. So she's thinking about the fourth dimension that's coming out of her head up there, that diagram. And if you've ever seen photos of her, she's always got a medallion. There's a certain age, there's only about 4 photos of her. One is she's a medallion with a lovely sort of like a Wedgwood china thing of the classical profile. So cameo, thank you, Emma, yeah. So the cameo was the first thing I drew, that white thing there. And then I drew her roughly as I knew her from that photo. And then everything else came and went and came and went and came and went, and it ended up like that. That's one of her paintings down at the bottom there, that target thing. In all of the drawings, these things happen, that list there. There's a certain kind of knowledge, but it's an ambiguous kind of knowledge. I don't know if it's good or bad or valuable. And there's, of course, history, because all the subjects come from art history. In the end, I try and make them very, very strongly iconic, because I am thinking about archetypes. I'm thinking about those Jungian stamped out impressions of types of people or types of behaviour. That's why I've written archetype. I'm also thinking about ideas stay in our mind. Warhol was there were certain things about him, but we have a fixed idea about him, or 1 or 2, but we don't have 1,000 ideas about him. Many people share 1 or 2 ideas about him, and a drawing, for me, must be attractive. You must. Why I go on doing them, and it's not just a notation, it's the first second, is that I want it to be very look-atable. It must have some sort of depth. You want to see it. So I'm often wondering, what is attraction? Is it that Hilma is attractive, or is art attractive, or is the fact that I did it attractive? Or has attraction eluded me? Am I only doing an illustration? Is art attractive, but I don't know if I did art? And if someone told me, well, it is art, I don't know what difference that would make. So attraction is almost the most puzzling element of all of them. And then there's always a play between details and very scribbly generalizations. The paintings change a lot, but also our ideas change. We allow some people into the what we call art, and some people we don't allow, and then 10 years later we change the lineup. They must be iconic. I have a lot of streaming ideas, and I'm often commenting. And that happens in all the pictures. So there are the spirits that tell her what to do. They live in Tibet. So she's in her studio in Sweden, in the middle there. There's her paintings lying on the floor or hanging on the walls. There's a close-up of her doing automatic writing, receiving instructions from the spirits. And the spirits are spirit entities who, when they were humans and had corporate being, lived in Tibet. You've got to get the information from the spirits via seances. She did that with a group of others, so they did automatic writing. They did things that happen in seances. She's being told to paint that picture up there.
Can we ask a question?
No, let's ask after Simon, because otherwise I'll lose the thread. Sorry, so sorry.
Apologies.
Yeah. I was struck by the similarity between Pentecost and a seance. They invite Leonora Carrington or Dorothea Tanning. I can't remember which one. Which of those women surrealists did a picture of herself with a great big bird under her arm? I don't know. Well, one of them, Leonora Carrington, they invite her to join in the seance. So instead of 5, there's 6 of them. She is working very hard. Since she's entered our lives, and we've all heard of her, she's brought feminine kindness to art instead of, the rage of the abstract expressionists. And we realised that those heroes of abstract expressionism were helped by many people, both men and women. But just for the sake of it, Hilmer is pointing out that Jackson Pollock was helped by Clement Greenberg, and de Kooning was helped by Harold Rosenberg. So that's de Kooning smoking, and there's Harold Rosenberg above him, and there's Jackson Pollock smoking and Clement Greenberg there, and there's a spirit. They're always smoking in the pictures because smoking for me denotes the past, and also it's a wonderful organic shape that's very useful for drawing. These are spiritual artists. Hilma af Klint is now allowed amongst her number. Before we hadn't heard of her, we thought that it was Paul Klee and Malevich, people like that, or Kandinsky who discovered abstract art. But we now agree that Hilma af Klint actually was doing abstract art even before them. So they've got all their watercolours and their pastels and their ink and their pens and their glasses of water, which they're dipping their fine brushes in. And Paul Klee's got a colour spectrum, and Malevich is carrying his black square painting, and he's smoking a cigarette, and so's Paul Klee actually, and even Hilmer's smoking. That's Kandinsky and Hilma af Klint are watching over my shoulder as I explain a Kandinsky abstract in a BBC film I made a few years ago about abstract art. Where did art start? We have unconscious ideas a lot. I think for postmodern artists, they think it started with Andy Warhol. That's the origin of art. And for abstract artists, people look at abstract art and they say, "Well, why can't we have, Renaissance art?" So they think Raphael and Dürer, it started with them. So there's Raphael on the left and Dürer on the right. There's all the studio bric-a-brac. Or maybe it was, religious art. There's Jesus. He's obviously in a lot of religious art. Or cave art. Maybe that started with them, which actually, of course, it did, because that really did start with them. And what were they doing? They wouldn't even think it was art. There's some cave art shamans 40,000 years ago in a cave. They do the art, and then they go into a frenzy and fire arrows or throw their spears at the art, because they want to influence the reality of the animals being much bigger and stronger than them. They want to get control over them when they go out and hunt them. Or maybe it was the classical Greeks. Maybe that's the origin of art. There's Philip Guston wondering if, Christian religious art. As a Jewish guy, a secular Jew, he had no particular interest in Jewish religion. He's thinking, what about this Jesus? Giving that a go. Dürer is drawing his mother. So the mother is the origin of Dürer. Dürer is drawing his mother, and we're wondering about whether Renaissance art is the origin of art. Why can't we go back to the beginning and have art that looks like things instead of diagrams? So this is a different kind of origin, I think, where when I was at art school, we all thought, well, abstract expressionism, it's from 20 years ago, because I was in the 70s. It's from 20 years ago, that was its heyday. And that's where everything comes from. Pop art comes out of it. Everything, all the isms that were important to us when I was in my 20s come from abstract expression. It's the fallout from abstract expressionism. So that's de Kooning, with one, I think it's Easter Monday behind him, and there's his studio stuff on the floor. There's all the abstract expressionists in the Cedar Bar. That's Grace Hartigan with the poet Frank O'Hara. She's a woman abstract expressionist. He really likes her stuff and he writes a poem to her. And that's Joan Mitchell, who has become an incredibly good artist in the last few years. She died years and years ago. But we've sort of been conditioned, and it is true that she is good, but we've also been conditioned to believe that she is good. And that always helps. Otherwise, artists can remain in obscurity simply because we're not mentally prepared for it. One of her epiphanous moments was being in the Whitney and seeing de Kooning's Attic, his painting Attic, which some of you will recognise as in a sort of shorthand version there. That's her painting away. That's her painting in a frenzy. That's with her husband, that French artist. Thank you, Riopel. And Frank O'Hara's come around. They're all just really happy, and they're smoking and drinking and shouting and talking. They've got all the paints around and all the wine. And she's doing a really great abstract painting. And that's her. And Riopel had a very, they're in France, of course, so they would have a nationality, a Ricard. And they're there for years and years, and they both were alcoholics. And I suppose most of their life was spent with headaches. But there she is, still going on in her 70s. She struggled, she painted and painted decade after decade, did really great stuff. Then she's visited by Basquiat and Schnabel. They come around and bring her some Campari. That's at the front there. That's a painting by her on some paint cans at the back. The Mythology of Tracy Emin. That's Tracy and Kirchner. That's Tracy in the 90s, early 90s, and Tracy in the 2000s. But those are the paintings that she now does. Having been a sort of shocking conceptual artist, she's a sort of painter now. Edvard Munch acknowledges Tracy. Says, that painting's not bad, come on. And Tracy says, yeah, okay. Who's that? Yeah, someone said it, but it's okay. Everybody else, don't worry. So Guy. Now, that is Albert's. He's got some of his early paintings from 10 years for on the wall. Goya, he went and painted he took his notebook and drew the people lining up to do the voting in the presidential elections last year. And his famous etching in the Capriccio series of donkeys riding men. Sort of how stupid is man? What's the matter with them? And they're all lining up to vote for Trump. That's Frida Kahlo, Goya, and Philip Guston, all painting their portraits of Trump. Goya is painting Saturn devouring his young, and Guston is wearing Goya's famous candles. He's taken them out. Oh, there they are in Goya's hat. Goya had lighted candles in his hat band for lighting, and Goya's got them in his hair. Guston's got them in his hair, and he's painting Nixon, President Nixon, who he actually represented many, many dozens of times. And all around them, they've got a sort of black magic set of clan hoods. I don't know why. The abstract expressionists, then the cedar bar shouting at each other, drinking, trying to compete and be the best, trying to be as famous as de Kooning, who's in the middle. Frank Auerbach, one of his paintings. Okay, thank you. I've been told there's 50 more minutes. But some people are too cold, so we're going to shut the windows. That's Walter Benjamin, and I don't know how you pronounce her name, but it's Asya Lakis, who's a wonderful Moscow revolutionary journalist and actress. And he was really buoyed up and encouraged in his Marxism by his love affair with her, but she was a great torturer of him. And this is when he's one of the few moments of happiness. They're sort of lying on the floor in her poor apartment. There's a journalistic materials up on the table there, and they're reading some essays he's recently written. One is about Nietzsche and the theatre, which is very interesting to her. She's an actress. And the other one, I'll have to look at my screen and see, and that's the Kabbalah, which Walter Benjamin was very interested in. Leonard Cohen and Janis Joplin, their famous moments in the Chelsea Hotel. There are not many of them I'm going to show tonight, but a lot of times rock culture appears, and especially 60s rock culture, because in my mythology, that always seemed a bit like art. I often, as I learned more about art, I tended to think, I see, so that's like the relationship between Pink Floyd and the Sex Pistols. It's the relationship between Gordon Matta Clark as the Sex Pistols and some kind of conservative artist as Pink Floyd. And now I would think that's because I don't know so much about current music, but I've always had a model, a sort of structural model in my head of knowing a lot, very, very detailed, in a very intense and love affair way, knowing about music when I was 14 and 15. And then when I was, the next 5 or 10 years learning about art, I'd have to transfer that intensity into this world which I knew nothing about because I didn't know who these artists were. And I imagined that they were a bit like those rock people. And I think that stayed with me. So these iconic moments of rock history often appear. Van Gogh only had one real relationship with a woman, as opposed to prostitutes, and opposed to his friends, relatives. And that was Sien Hoornik, who was a prostitute. But she lived with him, so she was no longer, her relationship to him was no longer that of a prostitute for 2 years. And it was a very, very sad relationship, but they did live together. And there must have been some tenderness. And I've tried to get some of that tenderness. And he was in a bad way, and she was in a bad way. But they had their love, and he was producing fantastic art. There's women with bowed heads carrying sacks of coal, because he was in the mining town he lived in for a couple of years, trying to be a lay preacher. And on the left there's a labourer in the field digging. When John Lennon's relationship with Yoko deteriorated so badly, she knew his route every morning. He'd come out of his bedroom along the plush white carpet to the kitchen to have his tiny bowl of rice, which was already ate every day. And she would carefully lay cat shit to treasure it. According to that sensationalist biography, which came out by Albert Goldman, who, funnily enough, died of a heart attack on his way to the Late Show to be interviewed. But I don't know if we don't know really if those things he said about poor old Yoko and John were true. But it's such a fantastic image, I had to draw it. And as I say, the Beatles come into it. I think love really is what we need. But I don't know if Donovan got much of it. There's Donovan in the background. And there's Faye, what's her name? She's not called Faye, is she? What's Woody Allen's poor woman? Mia Farrow. She's very happy to be there with the Beatles. And there's the Guru guy, he's great. There's the Beatles killing their pain with drugs in 1970. So they're fine, happy. Yoko's injecting. I don't think John and Yoko did actually inject. I think they sniffed heroin. But it's harder to draw that. There's Paul smoking joints and George. And Ringo's completely out of it. Probably Mandrax, I suppose. This is the Coke years of David Bowie and Iggy Pop when they lived in Berlin. And they never ate anything. David would have a sip of milk every month. There's Iggy's chopping out the lines. David's smoking his 1,000th cigarette of the day. There's some people having a dinner at Max's, Kansas City, and that fantastic singer Tim Buckley is on the right, and there's Janis Joplin in the middle, and there's Andy Warhol. I'm not sure who that is over there. There's all their plates of lovely food. Don't know what it is. So, an artist who is all mythology and who's such a fascinating figure. And I can't, really here to show you my drawings of him, really, so I'm not going to go so much into what I think of him. I think he's a really fantastic artist. I really am so interested in how such a chronically vulnerable, asthmatic little person, sort of damaged by certain things that happened when he was young, but also in a way gifted because he was born into such wealth. How he created this figure of Francis Bacon as his persona and sort of lived a life through that, which is such a successful and wonderful and free life and an enviable life, really. But in some ways, chaotic and selfish and narcissistic and probably destructive of a lot of people. And then, I know that John Edwards, his partner, was, everything about John Edwards in that recent book is so moving. He's so sincere and such a nice guy. And he really benefited from the relationship. Not just financially, but I think in a loving way. Whereas George Dyer, who we saw earlier, probably in the name, committed suicide. And we must think there's something to do, and then that was on the eve of Francis Bacon's retrospective. And there's something sort of ruthless about his relation to people, his sort of existential way of simply, well, you go through life and things happen and that's it. So you take your chances with such a character. Those are not water bottles, but champagne. So I'm going to go through very fast now.
Yeah.
That's Francis being a designer. They're all Francis. So when he was very young, he was trying to be a designer. And he was very good at it. Francis, George, and was painting of the Pope inside a meat. He's having tea with Patrick Heron. Patrick Heron is telling him about colour theory, and Francis is listening politely. He's at a retrospective. Mick Jagger's there, and Princess Margaret. Okay, myth of Picasso. He's drawing himself. When he was very young, he drew himself as a monkey with a little penis. He's in the Louvre looking at paintings to get ideas, and funnily enough, Hilma af Klint was there just then, and she's got a guide to Paris and a book of Buddhism. It's the invention of Cubism. He's painting prostitutes, and he creates Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Bloody Jackson Pollock, he says. It's easy if if it's nothing. There's a photo of Jackson Pollock. There's some Jackson Pollock paintings, and Picasso say, "I hate him. He's rubbish." But that's the thing with artists, because they're so narcissistic. They really do believe that the other artists aren't any good, whereas all they mean is they want the attention. And this indeed is the myth of Pollock. There's Pollock painting blue poles outdoors outside his studio. Lee Krasner, without her, he would be nothing. There's Hanson Ammer filming him underneath the glass, making that famous film. There's the shed of his studio in the background on the left there. There's the trees, because they lived in a rural place. Lee, incredibly strong character, determined, fantastic artist in her own right, who had to put up with an awful lot and suffered awfully from being in his shadow. And the respect for her is really almost all posthumous. So she never really had the recognition that she should have had. He gets Barnett Newman and Tony Smith to help him paint blue poles. That's an earlier stage of blue poles. They have an all-night session, they get drunk, and they paint a load of stuff. They help him. And the most iconic myth of all of Jackson Pollock. But as it happens, Hilma af Klint and Frida Kahlo approve of his anti-bourgeois. Because in their own way, they're anti-bourgeois, and they think this world isn't real. And there's something better. And de Kooning wasn't much of a philosopher, he's just drunk on the floor. And Gorky's drunk too. He's pissing in the fireplace at Peggy Guggenheim's party. Lee helped Jackson get better and better, and that's Jackson's first really big, ambitious, more or less abstract painting, mural. Lee brings round Helen Frankenthaler and Joan Mitchell and Grace Hartigan to the shed to look at Jackson, and he sort of stands shyly in the corner. He doesn't really know if it's good or not, but he does. And there's Hans Namath painting all those heroic portraits of him. So it's sort of confusing for Jackson. What if I'm a star and I'm in Life magazine? What about all this sort of turbulence and unhappiness I have? Long after he's dead, he's an inspiration to him. So they meet on the psychic plane somewhere. Maybe they're still there, meeting. Tony Shafrazi brings William Burroughs in the background with his shotgun, and Allen Ginsberg with his poems round to Bumstead's studio. Debbie Harry comes round to the studio. That guy from that fantastic The Ramones, Joey Ramone. Andy Warhol is over there, and William Burroughs there. There's all Basquiat's painting materials up there. There's painting materials in his studio in LA, and outside the window there's a big poster, big billboard. It sort of likes the way the billboard's arranged. There's William Burroughs visiting him again. There's a lot of works by Basquiat there. Basquiat and Keith Haring. They're trying to fight ignorance about AIDS. Basquiat visits Rembrandt. Why not? They should be in the same picture. And they've both got self-portraits there. Rembrandt's doing a self-portrait. Can you see it's an etching plate? He's etching a picture. And those black skulls that Basquiat painted, I think, can be seen as sort of symbolic self-portraits. Basquiat visiting Lee and Jackson, and Jackson's blessing them with his cigarette smoke. And Lee says, yes, why not? That's a pretty straight story that Andy Warhol was influenced by Roy Lichtenstein's pictures. When Rothko saw Warhol on the street, he had to turn away with a shudder. Who's that? That's Warhol's mother. Andy and Warhol's mother. They were religious and they were practicing Catholics. Valerie shoots Warhol. Las Meninas. R. Crumb. Janis Joplin comes around to see how he's doing with the artwork for Cheap Thrills, which is the Janis Joplin album of 1967. And Country Joe's there, and they all smoke joints and take heroin. And Robert R. Crumb's on acid. You can see all the acid effects coming out of his head. Clement Greenberg brings John Hoyland round to Rothko's studio. It's probably about the same year. That's what we just saw. A couple of years before that. That's a beautiful painting by Gorky, which took a long... Well, it didn't really take very long. I don't know why I'm saying that. What do I mean? I mean that we should probably be hurrying up. John Graham and de Kooning are admiring Gorky's latest painting in the studio. Some people come round visit Frank Stella, Lee Bonteque, Eva Hess, Agnes Martin, Jasper Johns. Frank Stella's painting one of his black stripe paintings. Eva Hess and Lee Bonteque go to an opening of Agnes Martin, and Lee brings Art News, and they're going to see if what's in it this month. Goya paints his demons on the walls of his house. Now, I'm going to go. This is the mythology of Guston. De Kooning comes round and Guston says, "Do you think these will work? Will anyone like them?" De Kooning says, "Well, I don't know, but at least it's freedom. You know, who knows if people are going to like things?" And they didn't actually. They didn't like them much. He didn't get much recognition for them. We all liked them. But although he had a few shows of them, they weren't all that successful, really, I would say. He had 10 years. There was a bit of recognition, but it was pretty reserved. What would it be like to be evil? He reads Dead Souls, and there's all the dead souls growing out of the grass, or maybe sinking into the grass, and there's Trump in the middle. So Guston's looking at himself, painting Trump and thinking about death. And Trump's a kind of reiteration of Nixon. Boris Johnson starts looming up behind the Klan figure. He was very influenced by Kafka and Dickens. He loved them both. There's Nixon at the top. Time's running out for us and for him. He thought Captain Tom was good, but the whole sort of profile of Captain Tom, he thought, was distorted by right-wing forces. Tom himself was a good guy and a brave man, but he doesn't, Philip wants to think about the problem. He doesn't really know what the truth is. But there's Nixon, Johnson and the Klan. Nixon and the Klan look on curiously at the royal interview by Oprah Winfrey. Murderer of George Floyd. We learn that he's guilty. The Klan give him a big cigar in prison. And Nixon, Mr. Evil, grinning away. Couldn't they come up with $15 minimum wage? Come on. Guston thinks in America. The reason they don't is because the power of the unions is destroyed, the same as here. You can't get a minimum wage without the threat of being able to strike. Kabul, were they really, throughout Afghanistan in the 70s, were they all wearing miniskirts? Or was it just a couple of streets in Kabul, a sort of fashion area, and a couple of streets of some of the major cities? Most of Afghanistan, of course, was the veil. So he's considering the mythologies that we have to deal with to work out what just happened with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Those are the laughing, lying leaders. In Guston's book, equally dubious, whether it's Obama or Trump, actually, or Bush, or Hillary Clinton, this incredibly hawk-like drone killer in Afghanistan and Iraq. And no, let's not forget Abu Ghraib. You know, if we're talking about atrocity in the Taliban, let's remember US atrocity. Alice Neal painting away. Bruce Nauman and Agnes Martin lived near to each other in New Mexico, and they often used to go to the races. And Agnes almost always got the winner right. And Bruce thought Agnes really knew her horses. Charlie punches Mick. That's the end. So there's Francis with Hilma and Philip Guston, and up in the corner is Artemisia Gentileschi, and next to her is Joan Mitchell, and then in the middle, just this little sliver of his profile is de Kooning, and up on the right is a wonderful artist I've done a lot of pictures of, but we haven't seen much of him in this show. I've shown you about a tenth of the work that I've done in the last year. So that's Bhupan Thakar, who's an Indian artist, and down on the floor, leaning against the wall, is a picture of Marcel Duchamp. So thank you very much for lasting.
Well, I don't really have a very well-formed question, but when you were showing some of those images, the reason I wanted to just interject at that moment was because I hadn't really appreciated the degree to which spirituality featured so prominently in the drawings that you've done. At least in they were accentuated in the in the ones that you showed today.
Yeah.
And I know, I have a sense that in a way your drawings are an analogue for a lot of feelings which you have, which aren't literally represented because they're very personal and very much to do with you, and they're sort of projected out into the world on these figures who sort of perform for you. And my question was, just in light of what we were seeing, was actually how central is spirituality in a completely non-ironic way to your practice?
Well, it's a very good question, actually, and I'm really glad you asked it. Had you asked it earlier, it would have been difficult because of the flow. And I'm glad that it's the first question that's asked, because it's an interesting one to answer, because the issue is very important to me, but the word is the difficult thing. Because I think spirituality, effectively in our age, like everything else, is something for selling. You know, it's a sort of advertising word, really, and it's long ago been detached, like many other values, words for values, and the values themselves have been hollowed out and detached from anything that's real. So why Hilma af Klint is such a marvellous subject for me is that it's so theatrical, what she does, and and yet we know, Spirit told her to do that, and we know that it's spiritual, and we know that there's something about spirituality. So for me, to be non-ironic about spirituality is not hard, but it's very hard to talk about it. So I think, for me, spirituality means the opposite of wrong material things. I don't mean all material things that are wrong. I mean when the material conditions are wrong. You know, if you think Jesus, he says, well, this Roman Empire, it won't last forever, and it's not the world or the universe. It's only the world now. This depraved thing. Even if it lasts for 5 more centuries, which it did, and it had already lasted for 5 centuries, it will pass. And God is eternity. So 5 centuries is nothing. So God isn't really a meaningful thing for me, because I'm not religious, but I appreciate that narrative, and I appreciate the the structure of that narrative and the sort of concept of it. So I think we live in an unjust society. So it's not just unjust, but it's deeply sick. All the time we're encountering that sickness, but we don't know, we have no idea what an unsick society would be. And that is a very tricky issue. We don't know. We don't know if Marx would have helped it, or if socialism would help it. Because certainly the examples we've seen of a socialist society on a big scale ended up totalitarian and little different to the Nazis. But we probably do know that we have a restless sort of feeling that there's something other than this. There must be something. And of course art, for many people, is that. Art is only art, it's not life, but it's all sorts of exciting messages about possibilities, which by allegorical processes you can apply to life. Politics is the real thing. By politics you change the material fundamental conditions. With art, it's involved with concepts and hope and or despair, or expressing despair where before there have been lies saying there's nothing to despair about. Art might be truthful. Augustine is very truthful about an awful world when he shows the clay. He comes from a kind of idealised moment of abstraction where you don't really show anything except there's a feeling that maybe artists are full of something or full of deepness or something. You don't show anything, and suddenly he's actually showing palpable evil, and he paints it in that Archron style, so they're rather solid looking. But so my answer is that I'm not a spiritual person in the sense of that sort of ethereal spiritual side of art that we're all familiar with, and it's a difficult thing for me to take seriously with my history. I've never really, I always find myself laughing at that kind of thing. But that's partly, as everyone knows, as you get older, you accept that things that you laugh at is often out of fear. And of course, the spiritual is what one wants from the spiritual, in a big way. It's kind of what you want from art, even if it's ironic art. Because all it means, as I said, I circulate back to this thing, it means daring to think about something very different to what we have. And sort of knowing internally, looking at history and seeing that there has been difference, knowing that there will be something different, and that there even could be something very different to what we have, even in our lifetimes. So that's how I could obviously keep this going. You have touched on an issue that is very important, but you also said something else about whether all these subjects are in disguise episodes of my own life, and they are indeed. And I mentioned it, and in fact some of the drawings do picture my mother in her breakdowns. Once David Bowie phoned her up because she wrote a letter to him when she was mad and posted it, and so I got to him with his publicity people, and he kindly phoned her up and talked to her. She was as high as anything, because he had his schizophrenic half-brother, and he was kind of used to it. And he published some of my stuff, and when I first met him he told me that I was just speaking to your mother. Which is, all my life has been embarrassment about my mother. She's sort of an icon, and he said, I'll just speak to your mother. But yeah. Anyway, thank you for that. That was really good.
My questions.
They don't all have to be that good.
My question seems very simplistic.
Yeah. Hello.
No, there were just a couple of questions really. One was, you didn't really mention how you actually started the whole thing. Because, I'm curious what prompted you in the first place.
Yeah.
It's quite a leap from what I've seen you do prior to that. And
is that the question?
Well, that was the question. Then the other part of it was, I just wondered what your dreams were like as the series had evolved. Because I know myself, from doing certain things you get involved in them, that you end up having bizarre dreams, and they are very dreamlike in the conjunctions of different things from different times and places and characters and so on. I wondered how your sort of dream life had sort of fed into it or had been affected by it, as well as how it
I'm going to take that second one first, because I've never dreamt directly about them, but I often dream of chaos and things going wrong. If anyone who's a driver probably has that dream where you find yourself unable to find the pedals, where you can't wake up. You need to wake up because or you've manoeuvred and you've crashed in a front door on the side of a car, and you just hope that there's nobody in that house, and then oh God, the light's going on, they're going to come out. And I think those dreams do connect to the drawings, but they connect to other problems and worries. But I think because the drawings are themselves so dreamlike, I think that's probably the logical reason why I don't actually dream about them, because they are dreams. You know, they really are hallucinatory. In that they are manufactured hallucinations. I think. But the first question was, why did I start?
Well, yeah, well, yes. Just how did it? I mean, you know, did you just wake up one morning and? I mean, presumably you did one, and the rest would follow. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
that is right.
But how did you start the first one?
Well, you know, Em and I have worked together for years, 20 years, we used paintings together. But I've always doodled. I've always drawing. When I was little, I was famous at drawing. And in fact, my nickname was Crumb, because of our Crumb when I was 14. But I suppressed, I didn't. It stopped because I got involved in other things. I got very ambitious and I wanted to be in art. And there didn't seem to be much drawing going on, exactly. For a while at art school, I was impressed by David Hockney and Francis Bacon and Kit's Eye and Larry Rivers because they were drawers. And I thought, well, I can do that. So I identified with that. But I sort of drifted off it. And I went more into what was actually happening right now, and that wasn't particularly happening. But why I started doing these, and I started these at a very particular time. It was June last year.
Lockdown, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in the lockdown, and there was this system. We play rummy a lot, and we have this little. We're always cutting out bits of paper and leaving around to do the score. And I was doodling on one once, and I elaborated the doodle a bit, and I gave it a very poetic title, which, funnily enough, related to when I was 6 and I was in a children's home. And it was quite a long title, but you couldn't see from the drawing it was that, relating a bit to what Simon was asking. And it was a very, very painful and frightening period of my life. And I applied it to this little drawing. And there was a system had just been established on Instagram by a colleague of ours at our art gallery, who represents us gallery called Vigo, and this bloke's name is Matthew Burrows. And he initiated this system on Instagram called the Artist Support Page. And anyone can put anything on it, and you sell it for anything up to £200, and you just promise that if you sell 4, you'll buy one from somebody else. So it's like 1,000, you make £1,000, you put £200 back in. So I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm never going to do that because it'd be so shameful if you had something there on the Artist Support. It's only £200 and no one bought it. So I thought, well, if you put a doodle on, you couldn't be ashamed because it's not worth anything anyway. So I put it on, it immediately sold. And I just couldn't believe it, and I said, well, I'm going to bring it to you. And I live in Norfolk, and this is a guy in Hackney. And so I said, well, next time I come, I'm going to bring it to you. And in the meantime, I sold a load more. And they were very doodly, you know. I still was too ashamed to do one that took a long time meaning an hour or 2 hours. So they took like 1 minute. And by the time I went down to deliver his one, I'd sold about 8 or 9. And so all that day I was going around delivering them. And that was how it began, you know. And then after I stopped delivering them because that was too much, because I was selling too much.
But then did you imagine that that it might progress into such a huge series? Or?
No, I didn't, no. And I didn't also imagine that I'd work on them so intensely. You know, the ones you've seen are more or less, that's how they've looked for about a year. And they began about 15 months, so a few months to begin with where they were quite notational. And now they've been like this, which is these balances of things. And I didn't imagine they would get like that. And that was just because of the encouragement, even though they're small amounts of money, because I was getting loads of small amounts of money, it was quite a big amount. And also the love and the encouragement and all the hearts on Instagram. And so that's how it began.
But I think it's quite an interesting lesson, perhaps for everybody, that something that you were sort of preternaturally good at, drawing and mimicking the appearance, characterization of people and things in a way that was immediately recognisable, that in a sense you discarded because it didn't match your understanding of the pretensions of the art world.
Totally
only,
true.
Only to discover yourself sort of quite late in life.
Yeah.
And in a sense open the floodgates for feelings that are very genuine and very real.
Well, that's two things, that's right, two different things.
That couldn't be placed within the confines of the conventions of contemporary art as you encountered it.
Well, that's very well put together, yeah. Well, that's certainly, I think that's true, but by the time I had been involved in art enough and knew so much about what goes on backstage that I didn't care really if it was art or not.
Yeah.
That allowed those to do something which came naturally and easily, which before I was nervous about. It allowed me to actually do it, and also to make it more ambitious than I'd done. But you're right that it also allowed me. I didn't challenge myself. Well, why am I painting a lot of people who have breakdowns? Oh, which is my mother, or this and this and this, or suicide. My father committed suicide. My mother had breakdowns, and I often paint Van Gogh and terrible things. So the terrible things that happen to artists. So there's two different things there. One is that you allow something that comes too easily, and the other thing is that you reveal a lot of yourself, but of course in a masked way, but it's very thinly masked. This is such a good question.
Some of the images relating back to the music in the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
where you had Max's Kansas City in,
Yeah.
and Bowie in Berlin,
Yeah.
and the Beatles in India. All sort of heroin,
Yeah.
LSD,
Yeah.
cocaine.
Yeah.
Well, are these of interest, its effect on these people? Was that some of the influence or creative things?
I think our musicians would be very good musicians even without drugs, but circumstances are such that they take drugs. And artists would be good artists without drink, but circumstances cause them to be alcoholics. And in my case, when I was in my early teens, I would take anything. I just thought it was fantastic. And I thought that was like Jesus. I really thought that if you took acid, you'd just see God and everything. And I actually, what you do see is you're so optically disoriented. It's just amazing. You look in your hand and everything. And when you're young, you're so fervent and sincere. And I really thought something was happening to me when I saw the veins moving and pulsating. And I had to think, it would take me a year to get to that door, if it even is a door. And I really thought that something had happened to me that no one else had it happened to except poets. So when I heard about poets, I thought, wow, that's like what happened to me. And also optically, because things detach from themselves on acid, I thought, well, Impressionism, that's the thing, that's exactly it. Because I was at 16 was when I really discovered, Thames and Hudson books about Impressionism. Well, I've been there, I thought. Seen all those floating colours and things going into dots.
But it would affect you in a unique way, in your way. It would be very different than somebody else's.
Yes,
journey.
yeah. I mean, in some ways it's a picturesque subject for me. It's another. I don't take any drugs now, and I haven't done for years. But I know the world of it, and I find it fun. It's dramatic, and of course it's seedy and horrible as well. And I look at both sides of it.
You would have read it, but the daughter of Quist wrote a great book.
Night Studio.
Night Studio,
Yeah.
which is a brilliant revelation of how he operated, and it was difficult for the mother as well.
Well,
drink. But you like to paint all night?
He did, that's right. And to the neglect of his daughter,
Yeah.
actually. And I've actually got a very good drawing of him at the kitchen table thinking his existential thoughts while the little kid's going off to school who never sees a day. And he's off having affairs, and having his existential worries and painting all night. So yeah, I mean I don't think it's a very well written book actually, but it's very revealing and interesting. It's a very important document.
It's interesting what you said about you doing these, and you're quite well known for what you do, and like, oh my God, he's popped up. But when Dustin did those abstract paintings, and when he did the crumb type ones, oh my God, he's left.
Oh yes, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, with them, our joint paintings are very much about dramatic harmonies, and they take a very long time. But really, M is the furnace of those colour ideas, and I'm the animator with the sort of handling. But M thinks up the ideas and mixes up the colours. So that's a certain type of thing. But I haven't actually stopped doing that. Because although I put a lot of energy in it, we still, in fact we sold a couple the other day, and we're working on a very big project, a sort of tapestry version of one. So I haven't put that aside. M does a couple of different things, and I do. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the scale of these because
They're little,
I know they're small, and like A4 I think you said, but I'm seeing them now on a really big scale.
Yes, you are.
And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wouldn't they look amazing at that scale?
Yeah.
Have you thought about that?
I have, yeah, but I don't know how. You know, it's easier said than done. I just don't know how to do it. I know I'm going to get there, and of course I want
They
to.
work on that size.
Yes, it's just that I'm so used to this.
Yeah.
To be bigger is like that. You know, it's just a different thing. It's not that I can't. I very quickly got quite skillful and finessed at this, and I'm reluctant to leave that. You know, I'd have to be crude for a bit. I'd have to accept that. I'd have to go into a period of experiment. Of course, each drawing is an experiment, but I have to go into an experiment that makes me feel uncomfortable. And the fact is, I do a few paintings, but they're not nearly so. They don't have the fluidness or the luminosity of these. But I certainly do want to do that, and I want them to be shown in almost every important gallery. At the expense of any artist at the moment. I'm going to want to be massive scale.